We're honored to be joined now by Andrew Marchand of The Athletic. He and my guy Stuart Mandel had a big scoop on Wednesday, and it's something that's been percolating behind the scenes in college sports. We're waiting to see when it finally rose to the surface, but Len Perna, who's kind of the search firm guru, and some college presidents, there's some ADs involved in this thing. Andrew, I'm going to let you take it away, because this is a Super League plan that sounds like kind of the dream of every person who's ever emailed me a 5,000-word realignment email.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the people that should be mentioned, in my opinion, is Brian Rolapp, who may not be a big name, to people, fans listening, but he's number 2 behind Roger Goodell at the NFL. If Goodell ever retires, he's kind of one of the favorites to be the next commissioner, and was the mastermind behind the $110 billion deals that the NFL just did. So all those people involved, Len Perna and Rolapp, it's kind of been the whispers like you talked about, since I first heard them, kind of dating back to, maybe a little before the Super Bowl. Those have been around media circles, what's going on with the Perna Rolapp group. Now, it's more of a Perna group. It's also the college presidents from Syracuse, from West Virginia, and some really big people in the business. And so, the idea is 80 teams in the top division, all 130 plus FBS teams involved, relegation and promotion for the 10 teams in the divisions would be, you'd have 7 divisions where there'd be permanent members of 70 teams, then an 8th division where teams from the 2nd division could work their way up.
Yeah, the promotion and relegation piece of it is great, because that's the one I just assume American sports would never go there. Like, they have promotion and relegation in the Premier League because it existed in English soccer when they started the Premier League. But it's a thing that feels tailor-made for college football. And I realize a lot of this stuff is kind of pie in the sky. There's a lot of blue sky thinking going on here, no bad ideas. But I kind of like that you've got people like Gordon Gee, the president at West Virginia. You mentioned the president at Syracuse. Like, they're actually talking about this in the open now, which I appreciate, because whether any of this comes to pass or not, they do have to start talking about a system that would be sustainable.
And your audience is probably interested, like, how does this happen, right? Which is kind of something we've been, discussing internally a lot, of like, well, is this realistic? And so, is this plan going to happen? I'm not so sure about that. But will these ideas maybe last? I think that's very possible, because I think, during the reporting, the big thing that I learned, and you might know this because you follow it so closely every day, is just when you look at the lawsuits and how much money these universities might owe in back pay because of NIL and that decision, and the courts are going to decide, and there'll probably be settlements, but it's possible they're going to owe billions of dollars. And at that point, all these schools are going to have to try to figure out what's next. The SEC, the Big Ten, they very well might try to figure out things together. We know that they're working together. They have their own coalition. There's other groups as well. But in terms of if there's a solution for all of college football, I think that this group has a lot of good ideas that make a lot of sense, because they're borrowing from the best leagues around the world. The NFL in the United States is the most successful league in terms of viewing. And if you look at what you talked about with promotion and relegation, that's a way to make those second-tier schools have something to play for. And there's financial incentives for everybody involved.
About Amazon Prime. And I want to tell you that if you want to watch the men's Final Four this weekend, which I imagine you do, UConn, Alabama, Purdue, NC State, a national title game on Monday, you can watch it on Amazon Prime. You subscribe to Amazon Prime. Within your Amazon Prime subscription, you add on Max. So now you've got both those things, self-contained, one app, one password. You can watch it on your phone, on your tablet, on your TV, wherever you are. It's incredible. Plus, the new Roadhouse, got Fallout coming out. It's an easy way to watch where you're not just flipping between apps constantly trying to figure out how to move between, because you can add on other subscriptions within Prime and have it be your hub for everything. So if you want to sign up for Amazon Prime, click the link in the show description if you're watching on YouTube. If you are listening in podcast form, that link is also in your show description. You click that link, get yourself signed up. You don't need cable to watch the men's Final Four this weekend. Yeah, and that's what I remember there's a TV consultant named Chris Bevilacqua. I'm sure you've spoken to him many times over the years. In 2010, he sat me down and he said, listen, the reason the NFL makes so much more per eyeball than college sports is they are the only seller of that level of professional football. And in college, you have these multiple sellers of the same level, and that actually drives the price down somewhat. And so this would get you to that single seller thing where, because I thought it was interesting in your story, you guys talked about, some TV executives said there may not be more money in the system, but I think the feeling is probably if they all did actually get together, they could squeeze a little bit more out.
Well, there's two things there. Could they generate better ratings with this system? Yeah, they probably could. The issue right now is that all the major conferences and now the CFP are locked up into the 2030s. So the TV networks have really no incentive to do new deals or to rip any contracts up. And to create a new system is not really in their best interest at the moment. And so I think that's an issue that is going to, someone involved told me they're going to have to bring the networks in and they're going to have to buy in. And so how do you get them to buy in? Well, if you're ESPN or you're Fox, you say, well, give us a 10-year extension. So then we have rights to the 2040s and maybe, you figure out the pay structure there. But I'm not like, do I think you get better ratings with a better system that's more like the NFL's TV setup? Yeah, you probably could. Do I think, you go from 3 million to 9 million people watching? I'm not as certain about that.
Yeah, I don't know that the ratings would jump to NFL like levels. I was thinking more dollars per eyeball than anything else, but it's also interesting, as you pointed out in your story, the Big Ten and the SEC have not so far been willing to meet with this group. The Big 12 hasn't, even though one of its presidents, Gordon Gee, is out front with this. And as you mentioned, the networks, ESPN and the SEC kind of tied together, Fox and the Big Ten tied together, and they are invested in this until 2030 for the Fox and the Big Ten, 2034 for ESPN and the SEC. How do you get those people to the table if you're the group doing this?
Well, you see, the thing that the beauty of this group is that they don't really have any real ties to the conferences or, if they're not media entities. And so they do have that advantage when they look at it. The problem that you have when you talk about the conferences, if you're someone like the SEC and you're Greg Sankey, you represent Alabama, but you also represent Vanderbilt. Same thing with Tony Petitti at the Big Ten. You represent Michigan and Ohio State, but you also represent Northwestern. So how do you go into a meeting where it clearly wouldn't be as good if you look at this setup and you're ranking and they're going to be paid accordingly, the top 70 schools. And let's say Northwestern's, when you go in there, they're 50 to 60, but right now they're being paid like any top school because they're getting Big Ten money. This doesn't seem like a good plan for them. They'd rather be tied in with Michigan and Ohio State in terms of what kind of check they're getting cut. So that's an issue that's one issue. Another issue is if you're Tony Petitti or Greg Sankey, do you want to basically get rid of the SEC or the Big Ten and then you don't have a job, or you do have a job but you don't have football, which is obviously the number one sport in the United States and for those commissioners. So they're not really incentivized to do that. So do I think that Petitti and Sankey, I think, they're the two most important commissioners. They can kind of drive where things go. And they represent the Big Ten and the SEC. So, that coalition is one to watch. But when you read our story, do I think that there's potential for these ideas to go forward? Maybe not with this group. I do. I think that is realistic.
Yeah. And I think that's the important thing that's going to come out of this, because like you said, to create what they're talking about would require a dismantling of the conference system that has ruled college sports for over 100 years. That seems a little bit far-fetched, but the idea of these ideas trickling into discussions that Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti have admitted need to be had, that doesn't seem far-fetched at all.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, you're more versed on this than I am, but the idea of the SEC and the Big Ten just becoming the AFC and the NFC,
Hmm.
has been out there, right? That's been
Yeah.
floated. Fans have thought
Oh yeah.
about it. Media's talked. Everyone's talked about that. But do you want to be the ones that get kill college football everywhere else? I don't know if you. I
Nope.
don't think you want to be that. And I don't even know if that's even good, right? Is that even good for you? You can argue that it's not. So you look at this system, and maybe you bring the conference. The other issue that you have to that's looming over all of this is how are you going to pay the players?
Yeah.
And so if it's one entity, the way they look at it, the group that we wrote about, the Perna group, there would be a players union, which probably
Hmm.
might be coming regardless. But if
Yeah.
there's one players union, that makes more sense than if there's a players union for the SEC, a players union for the Big Ten. If there's an overall that you're negotiating with, that makes more sense because the way it's constructed now, which again became clear in my reporting, there's going to be more and more lawsuits. Like this
Yeah.
is not going to end because there's no rules, and so like the pay should be unlimited. And that's probably unsustainable for college sports, no matter who you are, no matter how big your boosters are. I don't know if that will work.
Oh, no matter how big the boosters are tired of being double charged for this. So they would like to see something more organized as well. But yeah, it's funny. We mentioned the rules. I was talking to an administrator last week, and the guy was explaining to me, he picked one rule and explained how they could actually be sued from both sides of the rule by athletes, and they would lose both ways. So you're right. Something has to be created that allows for collective bargaining, which would make them mostly antitrust lawsuit proof. And I think what they came up with is actually a pretty good idea. And it is something that I know has been talked about in the SEC, in the Big Ten, where you have this single entity that is the employer. So you're dealing with one state's employment law. It's a private company that is paying, as opposed to public schools trying to deal with their own employment laws. But yeah, getting everybody to agree to that, to have one thing, is the big stumbling block with this group, as I'm sure
And
you
I do think you
noticed.
want to be out in front on this because
Yeah.
before the court decisions come to fruition, before Congress gets involved, I do think if you're, and the question is, and again, the space better than I do, is the college presidents, they're engaged in a lot of things. They have a lot of responsibilities. And as important as college football is, especially on, when you talk about those top 70 programs that would be in that number one division. But even there, those presidents they don't necessarily have their full focus always on football and trying to figure this out. And so we've seen that, we saw what happened with realignment. But I do think you want to be out in front of this. They'd be smart. Again, can you get everyone together? And that's where Sankey and Petiti have all the power because they have the strongest teams. They have the strongest television deals. And so they're the ones that have a very good chance of deciding, but they also have to look out for all their members and they're going to look out for themselves. So, in terms of their jobs. And so it's very complicated in terms of how it goes forward. And this group's not the only one trying to do it. There are many trying to and looking into this and trying to figure out how to go forward.
So in your world, you talk to a lot of television executives, and with all of the sports, the pro sports, and everything else. What do they think of any of this? Because it really is Fox, ESPN. They are the ones bankrolling the sport. How do they feel about all of the idea? Like, because I'm sure they know something has to get done because of what you just mentioned with the lawsuits and everything. But
I think, yeah, I think what gets lost, and covering realignment, and like kind of, we kind of, John Orr and I, we kind of have a unique perspective because we cover media as opposed to college. And so I think what sometimes is missed is that like their responsibilities are to their company and the shareholders and making money. It's not like, I know when the Pac-12 stuff happened, it felt like, again, you shouldn't really go by social media, but like they're not like charities. And so they're making business decisions. And so if you look at Fox, for example, they have a very good setup. They own much of the Big Ten network. They're able to control the Big Ten rights. I mean,
they're basically sub-licensing games.
Exactly. So, they're getting the best games. So I don't think they're going to be in a rush to break that up and let's figure out some other system. I think if anything, if push came to shove, they might and ESPN might get together and say, how can we figure this out? With those two being in control.
Andrew, we're trying to avoid antitrust lawsuits here.
Yeah, well, maybe, but I just think that's more, that's more feasible, because it's all about leverage and power and money. When you come down to it, we might be talking about intercollegiate amateur athletics, but at the end of the day, the people who have the gold make the rules. And so the media, they have the gold. Now, look, you get into the 2030s and the digital players like Amazon, maybe Apple finally gets really into sports. And so there could be a lot of gold out there from other places, but those contracts are tied up now. And if you tried to break them, which they're not going to try, I mean, that's not part of the plan. At one point, we were looking into that. Are they going to try to break the contracts? And that would just result in lawsuits. And it's just that's untenable. So I don't think that's it. At some point, if this were to go forward, they try to bring in the networks and see if there could be some sort of understanding with them. Because the point of this group is that if you have a distressed asset and they claim that, bankruptcy is on the horizon after these lawsuits go through and the settlements go through, then, that's not valuable to anybody if you can't, if it can't function. I'm not saying that's happening. I'm saying that's what the presidents, seem to indicate that we spoke to. But if that's
they know we can see the books on the entire school, right? Yeah. we know they are multi-billion-dollar endeavors.
That is true. That is true. But if you owe billions of dollars, I don't know if all the funds are supposed to go towards that. So
probably not.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the golden rule on this show. We love the golden rule on this show. We also love we more often use Don Draper's "That's What the Money's For," but I feel like he who has the gold makes the rules also is right on point. So, Andrew, thank you so much for enlightening us on this thing, because I'm just glad somebody broke the seal. People who matter, not people like me, but people who matter broke the seal and started talking about this thing publicly. So it's going to give us a lot to talk about. So thank you so much, Andrew.
Well, that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.